In today's webinar, A Winning Approach to Protecting Your Brand in China, we'll be discussing how to approach China and strategic best practices that help brands defend themselves online. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. We are joined by brand protection experts Trevor Robbins and Zach Wolf. Trevor is a brand protection analyst at MarkMonitor. In addition to implementing brand protection programs for his clients and providing Chinese marketplace guidance, he's also worked closely with MarkMonitor's anti-piracy, training, and strategic services groups. He started his career as a federal worker in Washington, D.C., and applies an international background towards providing innovative and effective IP protection strategies that effectively disrupt illegitimate online activities, infringing on the trademarks, products, or services of brand owners globally. Zach is the product marketing manager for MarkMonitor's anti-counterfeiting solutions. With over 4 years of experience in brand protection, he's focused on building a comprehensive, effective brand protection strategy for global brands in various industries, including technology, apparel, sports, and entertainment. Zach has managed a team of brand protection analysts and has helped establish industry-standard anti-counterfeiting best practices looking across multiple digital channels. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Marketing from the University of Idaho and an MBA from Northwestern Nazarene University. And as a side note, both Trevor and Zach have written on different aspects of brand protection in China in the past, and you can find, if you go to the markmonitor.com website and look for the blog under Customers tab, you can read their past articles. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Trevor and Zach and get us started.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much, Ian, for that welcoming introduction. So as Ian laid out, we're going to go through some various strategies for making sure that you've got all of the parts and pieces laid out to protect your brand in China. So we're going to start things off with a quote, as I think most presentations do. We picked this up, if you want to be original, be ready to be copied. That is certainly a compliment to all of those on this call. I think, one of the inside jokes that we have here is, you've made it when you have, when you join a webinar like this to figure out how to stop the counterfeiters from taking and taking advantage of some of the original ideas that you've made popular and have been able to move into the market. So for the agenda today, we've broken it down into 4 different parts. So the first one, we're going to cover some context of why the Chinese market is important. Certainly within our industry of brand protection, there's always conversations around China, why China is important, what we should do about it. But we've got some statistics and figures that really kind of help lay some of the context to why, if you're trying to figure out how to prioritize your brand protection strategy, why you want to make sure that China is at the forefront, or certainly at one of the things top of mind that you want to go after. We're then going to go into opportunities and challenges. I think within our industry, we focus quite a bit on the challenges that China brings, when it comes to combating infringers and counterfeiters. But there also is a lot of opportunity in China, and Trevor will focus and kind of go into more of the details on, why you want to make sure that you're fighting the good fight in China, so you can open up some of those opportunities for your brand and for your products. The third bullet that you see there is really kind of the meat and potatoes of the presentation. As Ian mentioned, Trevor and I have been fortunate enough to work with a lot of brands and in developing the best practices and the strategies they should take when combating something as expansive as China. And so what we've done is we've kind of pulled out 5 best practices that we've seen, certain clients that have them nailed, and some opportunities that we've seen for other clients to help strengthen their brand protection programs. And then finally, some examples and key takeaways. We always think it's important, if we're going to, suggest the best practice, or, to kind of highlight, what some people in the industry are doing well, we want to be able to follow that up with some specifics. So if time allows, we'll jump into some real life case studies that highlight some of the best practices that we're going to go over today. So why is the Chinese market important? Really just taking a quick look at this slide and going through some of the data, really, it kind of is surprising in some ways just how massive the Chinese market is, especially if we're talking, internet users, e-commerce, how they influence the online space when it comes to purchasing and making your particular products, popular and for you profitable. So over 721 million internet users. That amount of internet users alone outnumbers the entire U.S. population 2 to 1. So if you have, if you are a U.S. product or you take a U.S.-centric approach to your brand protection program and you know that China is an issue but you're not quite sure, how to pinpoint just how massive it might be, putting in a context of 2 to 1 of the U.S. population, I think can be a little eyebrow-raising. They have 40% of all internet users worldwide. Chinese online shoppers currently number more than 361 million. Again, if you put that in context of the United States or some of the other countries, you can really start to see just how much of a driver of the industry that they are. Online sales outpace those of the U.S. That was one statistic as Trevor and I were digging in and doing the research that I personally found surprising. It has always been my understanding that U.S. really drove the global economy when it came to online purchasing, online spending, influencing the markets, but the online sales in China have now outpaced those of the U.S. So, of course, we're going to talk brand protection strategy, but if you're just looking to be a part of, your overall business, China might be, a good opportunity to make sure that you're focusing on. And then over 40% of total worldwide e-commerce spend came from China in 2015. So again, just another statistic that really drives home, the overall, influence that the Chinese market has when it comes to online spend, e-commerce purchasing. So to put that in context of counterfeiting, kind of bring that back down to the brand protection level, this chart that you see over here on the left that comes from the Global IP Center I think is very interesting. So what they did is they went and they polled and did research on, the top 10 economies and their relative share in global physical counterfeiting. So the pie chart speaks for itself. If you look on the left, for the global physical counterfeiting, 461 billion. Of those, the 38 selected economies share of 40 billion. So if we break that out further and we take a look at the pie chart, pardon me, China accounts for 72% of that. What I find to be most interesting is the 37 other economies that represent 85% of world trade represent 8.76%. And so you can see in the context of, physical counterfeiting, China really is just, their contribution is just much, much greater than that of the other major global economies from the globe. This chart I don't want to kind of use this chart as an avenue to pick on China, most certainly not. All of those other global economies are represented as having some sort of counterfeit issue. But if we are going to narrow the focus of this conversation to China, I think it's helpful to set the context of just, how much they represent, the scope of the problem, and then we'll get into the best practices of how you can tackle those. The chart that you see there on the right, here's some more data that again just shows the increase in B2C e-commerce sales from 2010 to 16. So if you look from 2010 up to 2016, you see massive gains in the billions of dollars of people in China, going online, looking for the products, that they want to buy, looking for, whether it's counterfeit or those authentic purchasing experiences. They're really taking hold of this. So again, just one more chart that we wanted to use to set the context. So now that we set, kind of the global scale that the Chinese, market represents, especially when it comes to online shopping, we wanted to narrow it down a little bit to a single day, and I guess Singles Day. If you're unfamiliar, Singles Day is a holiday in China, kind of the reverse of what we would refer to as Valentine's Day. It does happen on 11/11. I bring up this topic because we did get, here internally at Mark Monitor, quite a few asks of, are you aware of Singles Day? Do you have a plan for Singles Day? What should we be doing about Singles Day? So wanted to follow up with some of the folks we knew would be on the phone. So it happens on 11/11. It was a holiday that Alibaba went in and kind of co-opted as their own to be able to use as a major shopping holiday. It happens to when it comes to holidays, it happens to the best of them, where they get co-opted into into consumer holidays. But if you look in 2013, 5.1 billion in gross merchandise volume, and that's grown in just a few short years all the way to 17.8 billion in gross merchandise volume. So they are moving in one single day, almost 5 to 6, 7 times more than what we would consider, our biggest or some of our biggest shopping days. So 2.74 billion and 3.7 billion on Cyber Monday and Black Friday. So again, just trying to highlight the context of the awareness that you need to bring to the Chinese market, just how popular it is. 14,000 different brands use Singles Day and had some sort of, sale or was trying to drive some sort of e-commerce traffic using that holiday. 207 countries and regions were included. Some of the, more recognizable countries, Apple, Nike, Siemens, of course. Some others that you may or may not be familiar with, Midea, Mizu were some of the top Chinese brands. And something that's interesting is initially some of the sites were only allowing Chinese shoppers to purchase, but they've recently expanded into Taiwan and Hong Kong. So not only is the Chinese market massive, but all of the global economy is now kind of introducing themselves or has opened the door to kind of capitalize on the Chinese market. So 14,000 brands is a huge, huge number of people that are taking advantage of Singles Day. So with that, now that we've set the context of why you should pay attention to the Chinese market, I think it was pretty clear just how massive it is. I'm going to let Trevor take over and kind of delve into some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that you might face as you begin to try to protect yourself from that massive scale.
Thanks, Zach. And Zach, that's a great job of setting expectations as far as the scale and scope of the problem. We understand that the production and sale of counterfeit goods is global and a multi-billion-dollar problem, and it has serious economic ramifications for both businesses and consumers. It's also a tremendous growth market, and the production and sale of counterfeit goods in a market like that creates kind of a delicate balancing act, and with it a lot of different challenges. So the market is growing in size, but there's also an increasing number of intellectual property rights cases that come along with that, and trademark applications as well. Due to China's economic growth and the complex intellectual property landscape, it's really imperative that brands create strategies specifically for the Chinese market. So you can't really take something that might be successful in one place, your U.S. brand protection strategy, and put it in China and expect to have the same level of success. It takes a customized approach, and definitely is a lot easier to navigate with an experienced organization who can navigate the different nuances. And those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. Things that are specific to China that you should consider in order to have your program be tailored for that environment.
All right. So now we're going to get into what we would consider the kind of the meat of the presentation. So again, out of all of the accounts and the clients that Trevor and I have been fortunate enough to work with, we kind of sat down and we took all the feedback that we've gotten, and we said, okay, if we've got 40 minutes to try and convey some of the knowledge to a wide range of different brands, what would be the 4 or 5 things we think are real key takeaways, things that are very, very actionable today that they could go back and they could say, okay, are we currently doing this? If we are, awesome. Are we doing this other thing as well as we could be? If we aren't doing one of these 5 things, who do we need to go to within the business to shore that up? Is it something that my current vendor or in-house could help me with? So what we came up with were these 5 things. So the first one, leverage technology, build a strong IP portfolio, understand scope and prioritize enforcement, importance of regional monitoring and enforcement, and then leverage local partners and expertise. So if we're looking across China and we're trying to develop a program that we think is going to be successful to take care of that massive scale and allow for those opportunities that Trevor mentioned, this is what we want to go with. So now we're going to go into each one of these and hopefully leave you guys with some best practices from each one that you can take back to your organization and say, okay, I think we're doing a great job here. Here are some things that we've highlighted, and maybe, identify some gaps and help you out. So the first one is leveraging technology. With the massive scope that is China, really using, different technology platforms can really make that effort much, much more manageable. So if you don't have, a unified technology platform that is helping you, with the insight into the different Chinese marketplaces, allowing you to take action, and then allowing you to report on your efforts, the task can just seem, potentially overwhelming or potentially daunting. So, being able to report on all of the activities that you're taking in what we consider to be the most or one of the most important regions is incredibly helpful. Oftentimes, a brand protection program can be a little isolated from the business, where the business knows that the actions that you're taking are very important. I don't think anyone within a particular business would disagree that deterring counterfeiters is an effort not worth taking. But a lot of times they can not be quite as clear as how those efforts kind of feed back into the business. But if you're able to use technology to help report on those efforts, and then you can take that back, whether it be within your own group, maybe there's other parts of the business that could benefit from the knowledge, that you've gained, whether that's, product teams, marketing, sales, really anyone from the organization that you might come in contact with. If you're trying to manually track and you're trying to manually do all of these things, it can certainly become, very, very complicated. On top of that, the different Chinese marketplaces themselves, they all use technology when it comes to their submission processes for, takedowns of counterfeit goods. Some of these platforms are much more sophisticated. So if we look at, AliProtect or TaoProtect, well, I guess they merged. So if we look at the Alibaba, submission platform compared to some of the others, it's very robust. They have, different profiles that you can set up. They allow, different trademarks to be registered. They really, I won't say they make it easy for the brand owner, but at least they have a platform, where you can go and you can, set up your profile. Some of the newer ones that, Trevor and I look at on a daily basis, maybe they're not quite as sophisticated and they just have an email address. Where you shoot something off and you hope to establish a relationship with. But again, all of them are technology related. So if you're doing things, ad hoc, whether it's, going onto the platform itself and just trying to search around to find these items, if you're just sending email enforcements and you don't have a way to track, am I being successful with this enforcement that I'm sending, all of those things can make the idea of enforcing on a Chinese marketplace seem, overly complicated. The marketplaces themselves certainly don't go out of their way to make it easy for you. But leveraging, specific technologies can help, kind of drive the efficiencies of those process, and then that will help free up, whether, the rest of your day or potentially, some other folks that are working on the program, so you can go after, some high-value targets. Maybe you're doing some offline investigations and some other things that Trevor will touch on here in just a few minutes. And then, relevant results based on in-country searching. So one of the things that we have noticed is that, there's particular marketplaces, Taobao, for example, where if you were to search within the United States, they automatically direct you to global Taobao. Some of the other sites do the same thing. So if you're trying to dig in on your particular brand and you're trying to remove those counterfeits, depending on where you're searching and how you're searching, you can bring back the results that you bring back might not be the full scope of the infringement out there. So if you're able to leverage, certain technologies, whether that's, proxies that will bring back relevant results from that region, or, some other type of technology that will let you get those relevant results, that is something that we have found to be very powerful and certainly something that we'd recommend.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, a relationship with marketplaces component. Technology is often overlooked. So as you're trying to engage and build those relationships and sending enforcements, knowing what the marketplace's technological capabilities are and the type of volume and requests that they're able to handle are going to let you set realistic expectations internally. So you might send enforcements that are dealt with in a matter of hours, and you might know those marketplaces where it could be a matter of weeks before you get a response. And making it easier, knowing what kind of technology the marketplaces are using for them to process your requests is going to be beneficial to your program as well.
Yeah, Trevor, that's a great point. I know, specifically there's a newer up-and-coming Chinese marketplace where, for a few different clients, we know it's quite a large number of counterfeit goods. And so we did, we reached out to them. We said, hey, you need to remove these, all the things that you would typically do in a brand protection program. And they responded, we have 2 people that look, that are dedicated to looking at this. And then so that kind of helped us reset the expectations. That also, is something you can help drive the marketplace to increase, their dedicated resourcing to these kind of problems, right? Sometimes it can be a potential afterthought, but it wasn't, if we didn't have the technology to leverage and for them to say, hey, let's go about this in a different way, we could have potentially burned a relationship, and now we've built one. So that's an excellent point of leveraging technology to help build those relationships.
So I think this is kind of the most foundational part of any brand protection strategy. It starts with building a strong IP portfolio. So we have some best practices thrown up here. Engaging with local resources to verify the strength of trademark rights. If you don't know exactly kind of where you stand as far as the level of protection that your brand has, it's going to be difficult to move forward in a strategic and decisive way when it comes to enforcement. And there's also a lot of different considerations that are specific to China that local resources will be able to kind of delineate for you to prevent any kind of mishaps along the way, because the registration process for various IP rights are different. China definitely has a unique way of doing things, most things, and that extends definitely into the trademark application and patent process. So the first best practice we'll share is when filing a trademark, it's not enough just to register the trademark in the language of the country of origin. So I think that people on the call are already past that point and know how important it is to register trademarks in China, but there are a lot of other considerations when considering filing, like timing. China is a first-to-file country, and you need to make sure that you're being proactive and registering trademarks before your products launch. We speak a lot to how long things take to process in China, and some of the pitfalls are not timing things correctly. You could look at upwards of a year of securing a mark, but if you wait until the product is already being counterfeited and visible for consumers, you may have waited too long. And definitely, obviously, language is a huge barrier. So in addition to filing in the native language, you need locally transliterated and translated versions to ensure that your brand is cohesive across different cultures and markets, and definitely to prevent trademark squatters from filing your brand's mark in another language. We have a couple of examples that we'll get to a bit later where that was exactly the case, where Chinese trademarks that are being applied for by non-owners of the brand, they're the ones who are defining the brand in the Chinese market as opposed to the brand owner. And also being aware of the different categories of trademarks is something that we run into a lot. We get really familiar with the international trademark class system, but in China, there are over 40 categories that you have to file, and you have to file in each applicable category separately. And again, that's something that takes a lot of time. So all of this should be, kind of front of mind if you're considering new products and considering how to protect them in the Chinese market. And then, just the cultural differences. So partnering with a local government and IP experts, it's going to help ensure that you have a smooth experience. You don't want to have things, even simple like faux pas, can set back your brand protection strategy. The best way to avoid that is having someone who's experienced with the Chinese trademark system on your side. And then it's also easy to think of registering China as like a unified, mainland China, but you're also considering Macau and Taiwan, Hong Kong, these all have different trademark application systems. There's a lot of overlap, and sometimes there's not, but definitely have a more realistic approach to the different geographies and different types of markets and platforms in those different regions. And then maintaining an updated patent portfolio to complement your copyright and trademark enforcement efforts. Copyright and trademark is pretty straightforward for any of the marketplaces that we engage with. Things can get a little more complicated with patents, but you want to make sure that you're kind of building up as much ammunition as possible when going after some of the more difficult cases and high-value targets. Also, being good stewards of your documents. You want to maintain an accessible reference library of your copyrighted imagery for past and present products. I think in the apparel industry, particularly, where you have seasonal product lines and you're changing out images on your websites daily, when those images are being used to sell counterfeit product, the first thing the marketplaces are going to ask for are evidence of where it was used legitimately. If you don't have access to those, you're going to definitely run into a wall there. And then also maintaining proof of authorization to use trademarks of any brands registered under a different company name. So companies change, ownership changes, names of brands change, but making sure that you can connect all those dots when you're enforcing is going to be critical. You have to be able to clearly show a documented path of ownership in order to get any kind of traction on most of the major marketplaces.
Yeah, Trevor, those are all great points, especially the one, I appreciate the copyrighted imagery best practice that you touched on. As we go out and we engage, all of these different marketplaces, and we start removing these infringers, ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to change the seller behavior of those infringers. As we make it more and more challenging for them to post and profit from those counterfeit listings, one of the first things that they'll go to is they'll start using, copyrighted images. Maybe they take them off the website. Maybe they, however they find them, that's, usually one of the first go-tos. And for us, that's a sign that we're winning, is that we're switching up the behavior. But one of the challenges for us is, being able to go to the marketplace and say, hey, these are copyrighted images, and then point to a particular area, especially within apparel. There's a lot of the apparel websites are very dynamic. They often, scroll through all sorts of different seasons. The season changes, something like that. But the counterfeiters will often pick up, on an old image and use that rather than something very current. And like you mentioned, if you're unable to point to somewhere that says, hey, this is authentic and this is one of our images, please take this down, it can make it very, very challenging. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, part of that stewardship, too, is an opportunity to engage with various stakeholders in your organization. You might be surprised how, many clients that we engage with, there's not, real clarity as to who owns what, where the images are stored, or actually where the, original trademarks live. So making sure that you're engaging with everyone internally is going to help you kind of centralize all of that and maintain something that's going to be, of use to you immediately and in a clear fashion.
Yeah, great point.
So understanding the scope and prioritizing enforcement. So we looked at the scope of counterfeiting in China as a whole, but just as important is understanding the scope of your underlying problem and making sure that you actually know what that underlying problem is, because oftentimes it's easy to take something that looks on the surface as a counterfeit problem when maybe it's a gray market problem or vice versa. So the ways that we kind of balance enforcement, we've got two things going on. Ultimately, with the goal to stop counterfeits from being made and sold in the region, but also to protect consumers from having access to purchasing them in the first place. So to be a hard target, to be a moving target, you want to be delisting where consumers shop for the most visible impact. And Zach talked, in regards to technology, about the ability to search as a consumer in the region would be searching. keeping those pages, the first 5-10 pages clean from counterfeit is going to be very important, and it's going to make it more difficult for consumers looking for a legitimate product to instead buy counterfeit. And this regular delisting is an important activity, and oftentimes that we hear whack-a-mole is a really popular phrase when it comes to marketplaces, of course. Yeah. So it is important to continue, doing that, because the second you stop, counterfeiters are constantly looking for avenues and ways to put, a product in a certain place where it's not being protected. So by regularly doing these delistings, you're essentially just putting the counterfeiters on notice. And, even consumers, as they see that listings have been removed, everyone's aware that, your brand is something that's being protected, and it becomes less attractive for counterfeiters to try and, hijack that brand from you. But there's also this balance with going after high-value targets and stopping things at the source or further upstream. So, resources are extremely limited, and that's particularly true, I think, when it comes to brand protection. So you've got to know when you should be spending investigative resources as opposed to, some of the more kind of laborious regular marketplace delisting. Understanding marketplace demerit systems, not every marketplace has them, but that's one way to make sure that you're kind of achieving both goals simultaneously. So as you're regularly delisting and hitting the same sellers, making sure that the marketplaces are held accountable for their own policies, you can limit the number of sellers that are allowed to continue selling on the platform. And then doing things like controlled buys are really important to supplement regular enforcement activities, especially when you hit dead ends. So you have to do both of these things, and depending on your resources, striking a balance is something that partnering with the brand protection managed services organization can help you do.
Yeah, and Trevor, the idea of making your particular brand a hard target is an interesting one. As the idea of regularly delisting is incredibly important. So if you're able to go and you're able to continually make it really hard for the counterfeiters to post their listings, what you're really doing is you're sending a signal to the market that says we're watching this area, and protecting our brand is something that's valuable. So it doesn't go unnoticed when a consumer goes to a marketplace that maybe known for counterfeiting. Let's say they're searching for your particular brand, and as they start to search, maybe before you start doing brand protection, it's very easy just to put, your specific brand name, your specific product into the search box, and then they come back with a whole host of counterfeit product. As you engage with these marketplaces and as you leverage technology and all of the other things that Trevor mentioned, you'll start to see that, the infringers will move off of your brand. They'll move off of your keywords. It signals to the market and to someone trying to find, hey, these products are not what you think they are. And then, it's something that I think gets understated sometimes and is actually pretty powerful. When you're able to clean up your own keywords and you're able to clean up your brand on a marketplace, you've made it incredibly hard for people to find those counterfeit products. And you've also signaled to the market, hey, we're taking this very seriously, and we're always going to be here. You might not be able to find something counterfeit now, and if you come back, you still won't be able to find it, because we've recognized, this is an area of focus for us. So just a great point to signal to the market.
So we keep mentioning the importance of having a regional presence, and that's especially true for monitoring and enforcement. So prepare to have a constantly evolving, or prepare your program to be constantly evolving with the marketplace and the landscape, and the different challenges and opportunities that the landscape presents. And the only way you can do that is by, being as in tune with what's happening kind of regionally as possible. And so, be prepared to adapt your internal processes to all of these changes that are happening all the time in order to be successful. And then understanding your distribution partners and affiliates in each marketplace and region. This is hugely important. And being familiar with what's happening at the regional or local level with your distributors can help alleviate a lot of pain points that brand owners face. And it's very frequent that we learn from brand owners that they've authorized a certain number of distributors in a region, but then those distributors kind of on their own tend to start authorizing other distributors. And what you get at the bottom of this process after it's happened for long enough is counterfeit product that's being mixed with authentic product, and that makes it incredibly difficult to discern between the two and take action. So part of that comes down to affiliate agreements and guidelines for your distribution channels. What you want to do is make sure that you're strengthening those agreements and you're being tough on those who break them in order to kind of have that level of control at the regional level. And then also maintaining separate goals and strategies for different business problems. So you're not going to count success the same way for reducing the visibility and volume of counterfeit sales as opposed to something like a gray market issue where your products are kind of skirting your distribution channels and showing up in places they shouldn't be. You need to benchmark those separately so you can articulate your success appropriately for each. And set realistic goals that make a counterfeit version of your product hard to find by consumers. And when I say realistic goals, I kind of want to kind of put in your mind just the idea that when we talk about success and milestones and benchmarks, it's really easy to get into this kind of thought process where the number of things that you take down kind of define the success of your program. And even though you're tracking these things daily, monthly, we really want brand owners to be thinking in the terms of what does my counterfeit problem look like in a year down the road, and what steps are we going to take to get there. So definitely keep that in mind when you're trying to determine what your success is going to be for your different business problems.
Yeah, that's a good point, Trevor. I think as we worked with different brand owners, tracking the number of enforcements that we send every week or every month or quarter, whatever the measurable is, I think is very important. I think that the idea of this kind of progress of I sent X amount of enforcements over this much time is a powerful metric that you should be measuring. It also gives you some leverage when you go to the marketplace and say, hey, we're very serious about cleaning up our counterfeit problem. We've sent you X amount of enforcements over time. But one thing that I think can happen is if you're using enforcements as the only metric of success, then the enforcements become kind of a means to an end rather than simply like a measurable tool of can people go on this particular marketplace, find counterfeit of my product and purchase it. And when I mean people, what I'm really referring to is consumers who are looking for an authentic experience. Unfortunately, there will always be those folks that will go out there. They know they want a counterfeit version of your particular brand, unfortunately, and as much as we try to thwart them, those kind of people will always exist. But one of the people, the types of consumers that we really want to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect is those that, they want an authentic experience. I think everyone, when they shop, they do look for a deal, right? And so there's always a sweet spot where you have, maybe a loyal consumer who thinks they're having an authentic purchasing experience. They get the product. Unfortunately, it's counterfeit, and then they blame the brand, right? And so if you're only looking at, how many enforcements are we sending, rather than, as you mentioned, hey, this is where we're currently at, where do we want to be in a year? Which marketplaces do we want to, have impacted, built those relationships with, cleaned up our space? What's the next step? All of those kind of things that you really should be thinking about as you build a brand protection program, not just simply trying to send counterfeit enforcements. I think there's a distinction between the two, and so that was very good to point that out.
Yeah, and enforcement volume, it's also kind of a tool at the same time.
Right.
So if it's not, the be-all, end-all, it can also be an indicator. So if you consider your compliance, your takedown success rate, it can be kind of like a health check of your relationship with each marketplace. If you're not getting good compliance, there might be some work to be done in improving that relationship. And, like Zach mentioned, what we actually want to see is a decline in the number of enforceable listings. So definitely important to keep those things in mind when looking at success metrics.
So now that we've discussed, the kind of all of these, best practices, really a lot of this success can hinge on if you have, kind of this local partner, or you're able to leverage local expertise. So this was a really interesting news article that was brought to our attention that I thought I'd share with the interested group. So one of the things that's kind of new that comes from all of this is, we of course, work with brands every day to protect their brands, but Alibaba, is kind of pushing back a little bit over some, I guess, fake submissions. And so really, what we want to highlight with this news article, and I'm sure if you work in the industry that this might have already bubbled up to you, that there are companies out there where these fake submissions are unfortunately impacting the success of overall brand protection. So when Alibaba is able to take a step back and say, hey, we're kind of always, being attacked, well, let me turn the tables on you and say, we are receiving all of these, kind of fake submissions. I think in this case, there was a number of things going on. They were simply submitting to get competitors' information or competitors' listings taken down. They falsified some documents. Some really rogue things, were happening that bubbled up. So, with these rogue companies, it makes it, much more challenging for folks like Trevor and I, and, for you internally, to have the same level of impact if all of a sudden this kind of base layer of trust has eroded a little bit where, that used to be, something that's standard. And then additional scrutiny, it interferes with the process. And what I mean by that is, we and you, of course, work very hard to build relationships with these marketplaces so they know if, in a particular enforcement, if they know where it's coming from and that's a trusted, partner or vendor, the timeliness of the takedown, the compliance rate, as Trevor mentioned, all of those things can be affected. But anytime there's, these rogue agents out there who are undermining that, it can make things more difficult. So with all of that said, if you're looking, a best practice is to leverage local expertise, but you want to make sure that you're picking the right partner. This was kind of new to us a bit that, there were so many of these, well, not so many, but that there were these rogue agents having this kind of impact. So if you're going to leverage that local partner expertise, make sure you pick the right partner. And a few other things to follow up on. So if you've identified, a local partner, there's a few different ways that you can do that. Industry referrals are always great. Certainly working with a brand protection vendor that has, relationships and presence in that area is always, a best practice. So if you've already established, a local partner, here's are all the things that you can expect them to help you with. So one, they help you build the trust with the various sites. So if you're trying to just package up what you do in the U.S. and you're trying to just enforce the same kind of way, using the same type of language that, that might work on a North American marketplace, it might not work as well in China. In fact, you could even go so far as to make them, kind of tune you out as a brand. But if you have that local presence who speaks the local language, who knows kind of the nuance and, the customs of the back and forth, we've seen that to be very helpful. As I touched on earlier, while the marketplaces do leverage technology and most of them have a platform of some kind for submissions, they sure don't make it easy. They can have some very complex processes. So again, having someone who can read the local language, really pick up on exactly what the terms and conditions say, being able to leverage those for your brand is very helpful. Again, establishing the relationships. And then this last one is something I think is unique and is really a differentiator. So with these technology platforms, anybody has access to them, but they're set, to try and help the masses, where your particular brand, of course, is unique, and maybe you need, some kind of additional an additional way to, to enforce, or you need some additional information, something like that. If you have that local presence and they have that local relationship, they can reach out directly on your behalf. We've seen instances where, a particular way to enforce, which was once not compliant, became compliant just because the brand owners were able to work with that local presence and kind of navigate around some of those issues. Again, making sure that you have a trusted partner and then using that trusted partner to help you with all of these different things when enforcing in China can be incredibly powerful.
So being attuned with changes in the landscape, because they're constantly happening, is extremely important. And as Zach was just talking about, having a local partner who can read the local language and a native speaker is really important here, because part of being informed is even on the technical level. So as Zach mentioned, with all those technology changes, if you have an established partner, a lot of the kind of hang-ups that come with the evolving technology can be kind of mitigated by the back and forth talking about the technology itself with a local presence. Also, it's because it's such a rapidly changing landscape, we're a fairly small group of people here on the call. So make sure that you're, keeping up with anything from legal journals and blogs or briefings, any managed services or brand protection company, are constantly publishing white papers or case studies. So being attuned to those are going to make sure that your brand protection program is being as dynamic as possible and is prepared to handle the challenges that come with this constant change. And keeping in mind that China's tort system is relatively new and it's quickly changing, and that makes it even more important to closely monitor those changes. Marketplace policy changes or updates. They don't exactly send an email every time they change a guideline, or maybe it's the demerit system. Something that might have been a 3 strikes policy yesterday, today it could be a 27 weighted point system, and you might not be aware of that unless you're monitoring the changes in the policies that they make publicly available. And also, just being in touch with other brand owners and the different challenges that they're facing, contacting and kind of building partnerships within your own industries, it's really going to just, be an improvement for everybody, and you kind of combine that knowledge. And here's just an example of, recent changes in regards to accountability. And this is, something that could potentially become law in China, where the government is actually holding marketplaces accountable for carrying out the policies that they've created when it comes to infringement. So they're putting the onus on the marketplaces for managing intellectual property enforcement correctly, and putting up real penalties for allowing illicit trade activities to continue. So these types of publications, having a local presence, again, and somebody who is keeping up to date on the latest developments in Chinese tort law is really important. And these cases end up defining marketplace policy at the end of the day. So as recent as a couple years ago, some of these cases determined how Taobao or Alibaba or any of the major platforms would now approach, say, the use of a logo differently. So just another reason to stay in tune.
So now that we've kind of, gone through, 5 of what we consider, best practices to making sure that you've got all of your bases covered for a good brand protection program in China. Now we've got a couple examples. I know we're closing in on time, and so we certainly want to leave some at the end for questions. So bear with me as we maybe go through these a little more quickly, and then we'll go through and make sure we have some time to answer any questions. So, Trevor, you want to take that first one?
Yeah, so no one feels singled out because this is something we've dealt with a lot. So you've got a global brand trademarked in China in one class. So say that they're making shoes and they registered their world-famous trademark to protect just shoes. Suddenly they start finding bags on marketplaces that are branded with their brand name. So this is just a reminder and encouragement to make sure that your IP portfolio is strong and that you're registering in all appropriate classes and being proactive about it.
Yep, and then the second bullet point, this came from a major manufacturer of a certain product, we'll say. As Trevor mentioned, and I think that while it seems so obvious, I don't want it to go understated, is being good stewards of your documentation. And so they came to us with knowing that they had a big counterfeit problem with one of their major products. As we went to the marketplaces where we would generally start, and we looked and we noticed that the trademark certificates and some of the other IP documents for this product had unfortunately lapsed. Went back to the customer, asked for the renewal certificates, and it turned out that they didn't have them. And so getting those types of documentation from China is not particularly timely, especially in this case where they did have a major issue. So especially if you work in a particular company that maybe owns a lot of different brands or has a large number of product lines that you're trying to protect, making sure that you have all of the trademarks with all of the renewal certificates and all of the change of ownership, should you have any of those, properly lined up, can make your life, our lives, everyone involved in this project, make their lives much, much easier. So, we did kind of find some other avenues to help them out, but that happens unfortunately more often than you think, where we're ready, and the brand is ready to go out there and kind of, make an impact, and then it's tripped up by a simple, missing piece of documentation. So I don't want to understate the value of kind of having your house in order when it comes to that paperwork.
Absolutely.
And then the bottom one, again, I think we did touch on this for apparel, and really anyone who has constantly revolving product lines, working with other parts of the business to make sure that you have historical images can go a long way, especially as we begin to impact the market, with the takedown notices and such. So here is a new trend that we've seen that we wanted to kind of show everyone. If you're unfamiliar, people kind of know that with Alibaba, some of these other big marketplaces, they've got these platforms that everyone can use. They've got people kind of know what the deal is when they venture into Alibaba. What we're seeing now is people are using third-party image sites to host their counterfeit images. So rather than posting up and taking the time to make a store on Alibaba that I'm hoping the brand owner doesn't take down, I can go to one of these sites, I can post images of all my counterfeit wares, and because of the terms and conditions, these stay up. Then if you go to these sites, you find the counterfeit images, then you can interact with them. Maybe it's over WeChat, maybe they send you a private link to a private Alibaba seller page, whatever it might be. There are ways to have success with these, especially if you find that they're using, copyrighted images, if you're able to point to those, as we've mentioned. All of those can be helpful, but certainly wanted to briefly bring this up as something to be aware of, and to either take in-house or to ask whoever you might work with on your brand protection account. As Trevor mentioned, working with the various marketplaces, they all have, or most of them have, some kind of policy where they claim to ban sellers or ban stores, but working with those can be pretty kind of cumbersome if you don't track them properly. Here is some actual data from a brand where they took the time with those local resources to pull out and track this sort of three-strike policy. So they were able to do it, and it was very successful, but they had to go kind of above and beyond. They had to use that local nuance, and they had to work closely with the marketplace to get them to follow their own policy. So if you do kind of venture down the road of using their policies and making them adhere to them, which we certainly recommend, just make sure that you're tracking it appropriately. So they're able to have a lot of success for the size of that brand. 460 plus stores are moved in over 12,000 listings. And I think most importantly, as Trevor mentioned, now when you go to these particular marketplaces and you search for that brand, you can't find it. And so cleaning up the optics, just making people believe that that counterfeit product has been removed, is an incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah, and this is just a good representation of something that we touched upon in a few different ways. So if these are enforcements over time, this is kind of the ideal curve that you want to see, the ideal trend, where if it had been static and you were enforcing on the same number of listings each month, that doesn't show any progress, in your program as far as making things better. So this is what we're trying to achieve, and you can consider any brand protection efforts as downward pressure on that trend line. So, we benchmark the problem and understanding the scope before you begin, executing your strategy. And then you can see after, employing your strategy over time, you have this new lower baseline. And being able to maintain that lower baseline also frees up a lot of resources. So if you achieve that by, regularly delisting and cleaning up the most visible pages, maybe you can pivot those resources towards, looking into high-value targets and the source of the problem. And it can also be it also demonstrates just all the space that's opened up for legitimate business once you kind of get those counterfeiters out of that space. And then also the reduction of risk and associated costs with having, a lot of counterfeit goods out there available for public consumption.
Okay, and as you see here, there's some key takeaways. So, as we've gone through this, China certainly matters. It has the massive global impact on e-commerce and the counterfeit in general. The revenue side, as Trevor touched on, there's an opportunity there if you take the correct steps to mitigate some of those infringing listings. There's a lot of challenges. I don't think that anyone's naive enough to know that we're just going to go into China and we're going to do our brand protection thing and we're going to clean it up. But don't let those challenges kind of frustrate you or stop you from continuing to make progress. There's lots of expertise, there's lots of industry groups, there's lots of best practices that we've touched on that can really go a long way in helping you out. And then finally, partner. It's very difficult to think that you can have an impact in such a massive region without employing some of that local expertise to navigate some of that nuance. It just makes it very, very difficult. So with that, we do have a few minutes for questions. And as Ian mentioned, sorry, Ian. Did I cut you off?
I was just going to say thanks, Zach and Trevor. We are up close to the top of the hour, but we've had a few questions come in. So why don't you take a stab at the few you can see? Okay.
Yeah, we'll do. And then, as Ian mentioned, anything that comes in that we don't get to, we do get those questions, and Trevor and I will make sure to follow up, with anything that we might not get to in the last few minutes. So, one of the first questions that came in, and Trevor, since I'm reading it, maybe I'll pose it to you. In the work that you've done with various brand owners, do you think that the Chinese marketplaces in general are getting better or worse?
If you had asked me a year ago, I might have said worse, but things are definitely getting better. It's a slow process, but even within the last couple of years, these marketplaces and their willingness to work with brand owners is just far beyond what it was, in recent memory. So yes, it is getting better. I think that there is a better understanding generally of intellectual property in China, and obviously things like new legislation of holding marketplaces accountable indicates that improvement.
Okay, great.
So Zach, I see one here on the brand. So tracking specific account removals on Taobao, they might be reluctant to share that information. So how do you get those details, or how do you track them?
Yeah, and I'm going to guess that this kind of refers back to that case study that we showed. And the way the question is posed is absolutely right. So Taobao in general is they keep things pretty close to the vest when it comes to their information. The information that you saw there in that spreadsheet was, for the most part, manually tracked. So again, it took a lot of effort to put that, that spreadsheet together to track that data by going back to those things that had been enforced on, seeing if they had been removed, looking to see if that store had been closed down. So up front, there was a lot of work to track that information, but every time they would track a piece of information, they would share that with Taobao and say, hey, we're doing the right thing here, can you close this store? And it just kind of built the momentum to where they were sending, bigger batches of that spreadsheet, and then they would go and check, and Taobao had taken action. So I as the question alludes to, I wish that, some of those marketplaces would be more open to sharing, but sometimes you just have to kind of dig in, manually track that stuff, use the local resources that you have to really kind of force the marketplace to play along with their own terms and conditions. And it does look like that we are past the hour, so thank you, everybody. Ian, I don't know if you have some wrap-up information.
Yeah, just to wrap it up, thanks Zach and Trevor for sharing those best practices with everyone. That's great. We'd also like to thank everyone for their participation. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar and presentation slides with a recording in the next couple of days, so please be on the lookout for that email. And that concludes our webinar today, so thanks everybody for tuning in, and have a great International Women's Day.